Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. It is Wednesday, which is a Wednesday with Will. If you don't know what that is, I have started a Shakespeare journey. I will be reading over the next couple years all of Shakespeare's plays, one play a month with May and December off. And I will spend that month reading the play, watching a production or of some sort of it, maybe reading an adaptation of it, all sorts of stuff. And the plays are chosen randomly. I draw them out of a tin, and this is the first month of it. And the play that I drew for this month was The Winter's Tale, which I will get to in a moment. So I will say that I will be using the Folger Shakespeare Library versions of these. Not that it really makes that much sense because we aren't worried about translation or anything like that. Just sort of, just so you know that there are a lot of annotations in this, so I can use the annotations if I needed. So let me tell you a little bit about Shakespeare, about The Winter's Tale. The Winter's Tale first appears in the first folio in 1623. However, it's believed it was first performed in 1610 or 11-ish. We're not really sure. It's not one that's super famous, obviously. It's not Hamlet. But it is also one that doesn't fall cleanly into one of the three buckets of Shakespeare's plays, which are histories, tragedies, and comedies, because this starts out like a tragedy and it ends like a comedy or something. I'm going to try to explain it. This is a little bit crazy. I will say this is going to be a high-level explanation. One thing that is present in this play are a group of characters who actually take up a large amount of real estate in the later acts, which have nothing to do with the story. They're these shepherds and this con man, and they sing songs and tell jokes. I'm going to not even address them. They're not important. I'm going to just kind of go the story of it. Please bear with me because the story is a little bit bonkers. We have two kingdoms, Sicilia and Bohemia. And the kings of these countries are Leontes, who's the king of Sicilia, and Polixenes, who's the king of Bohemia. These two are friends. That's where we start. Now, Polixenes is visiting Leontes and his wife, Hermione, and their son, Maximilimus, in Sicilia. Hermione is very pregnant at this point. That's where we start. Leontes is trying to convince Polixenes to stay with them longer. And Polixenes is just like, nope, I have got to get back. I've got to get back to my kingdom. And so Leontes says to Hermione, so like, maybe you can do it. Maybe it's a woman's touch that it needs. Maybe you can convince him. So Hermione goes to Polixenes and says, why don't you stay? And she does convince him pretty quickly, like, okay, I'll stay a little bit longer. That's a pretty simple setup, except Leontes, for reasons that make no sense. Well, I have a theory about it, but they make no sense. Leontes thinks this means that Hermione is cheating on him with Polixenes, and Polixenes is the father of her soon-to-be-born child. And kings don't like to be cuckolded. So he grunts and moans about this for a while, but then he decides he is going to poison Polixenes. And he tells one of his courtiers, Camillo, about this. And Camillo says, okay, and then goes over to Polixenes and says, hey, the king's gonna poison you. You'd better leave. So both Polixenes and Camillo flee. They go back to Bohemia. Leontes is very upset about this because he couldn't get his revenge on this thing that clearly didn't happen. And so he then directs his ire towards his wife, Hermione, again, who is very pregnant and is convinced that the child she is carrying was sired by Polixenes. So he throws her in prison for adultery. Now, Hermione has a lady in waiting named Paulina, who is very important to this story. Paulina's like, what? So she gets after Leontes, says this is crazy. She's able to go between the prison and the king. So she's not imprisoned with the queen, but she's able to visit her. So she's sort of the go-between. And she's telling Leontes over and over and over again, this is crazy. Your wife has not been unfaithful to you. You are the father of her child. Think of your wife. Think of your unborn child. Think of your living child, because they do have a son named Maximilius, who doesn't actually ever show up in the play. He's a little kid, apparently. But Leontes is hearing none of that. So he decides he's going to put Hermione on trial. And to bolster his case, he sends two courtiers off to Oracle. And I do think they might say it's the Oracle of Delphi, but I'm not sure about that. Or Delphi, whatever. to find out what the oracle says about guilt. Those courtiers go off. He starts holding the trial, and Hermione's like, "Hey, what are you doing? I am your wife. I have never cheated on you. You are the father of my children." And he's not hearing any of it. He's just calling her a liar, and everyone's like, what is up with this guy? In the midst of the trial, the two courtiers come back, who've gone to see the oracle, and they say, the oracle says she's innocent, Polixenes is innocent, no wrongdoing was done. And Leontes is furious because he was counting on the oracle to like back him up. And he's like out of his mind with jealousy. So he throws Hermione back in prison to be executed at some point. And Paulina is furious with this, right? Because she's mad. She's like, this is crazy. And in prison, shortly thereafter, Hermione gives birth to a daughter. And Paulina's like, enough is enough. So, and I can't remember at this point. At this point, I believe that Hermione dies, and she dies of emotional distress. She either dies before or after this next part, but of emotional distress. Let me rephrase this. She is said to have died because it happens off screen, and you know the rule about television. So Paulina's like, this is enough. So she takes the baby up to Leontes and lays the baby at his feet and says, this is your daughter. Man up. Basically. And Leontes is like, no, she's a bastard. Get her out of the kingdom. And he tells one of his courtiers, Antigonus, is that his name? Antigonus, who happens to be Paulina's husband, take this child away, leave her in the wilderness. So the elements. And he's like, really? And everyone's like, no. So Antigonus kind of feels like he has to because it's the king, but he's got a plan. So what he does is he gets like some things to put with the baby to show that she is royalty. And I'm sure that there's an assumption here that the rumor of craziness will be out there. So he goes off, and I believe this is where Hermione dies. And Paulina's furious at this point. She's like, yeah, wouldn't you threw your baby out, your wife is dead. Oh, and also Maximilius, the little boy that we never see, also dies of emotional distress. They're all dead. She's like, let's face it, it's going to be 3 people are dead because of you, and you're stupid. And she curses them and says, you will never remarry. And then at this point, after he thinks everyone's dead, Leontes is kind of like, oh, I don't think that maybe she did cheat on me. I'm a bad person. My wife is dead. My son is dead. My daughter will be dead. And he's feeling miserable. And Paulina's like, huh. But things are still not great for Paulina because, as I said, her husband, Antigonus, is charged with taking the baby and leaving her in the wilderness, which he does. And he's like, I really hope someone finds her and takes care of her because this is, he's done everything he can. He put her in a place where he thought that she would be found and everything. And then the thing about this play is, there are so many famous lines from Shakespeare in so many different plays, but I can't think of any from this play. But there is one part that is very famous from this play, and it's actually a stage direction. And this is right was Antigonus, lays the baby down, leaves the goods with her, so everyone knows. And then it says, he exits, pursued by a bear. So yes, a bear comes on stage and eats Antigonus. In fact, there's passages later where like Shepard's like, I'm going to go see what body parts are left. So this is wacko. Like this whole thing so far is very, very, very wacko, right? Like when the bear came, I was like, what is going on with this? So at this point, then we have a time jump. And this time jump is handled by a character called Time coming up and saying with a very long speech, 16 years later. I mean, it's a long speech. It's a page and a half just to tell us it's 16 years later. So at this point, the little girl has been rescued by Shepard and his family, and they kind of know the deal with her. And they've named her Perdita, which means lost one. And Perdita happens to have encountered and fallen in love with Florizel, who is the son of Polixenes, the king of Bohemia. So Polixenes and Florizel, they just want to get married and live happily ever after. So they come up with a plan that they're going to dress Perdita up and this whole part doesn't make a lot of sense, I'll be honest. And go and introduce her to his father and then reveal who she is. Like, how would he even, it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, they do this, and apparently he knows that who Perdita is, and he's just like, no, you can never get married. And no, I don't want you to marry her. And Florizel and Perdita are just heartbroken. But then they're told by this con man who has nothing else better to do in this court but sing songs and tell jokes that they should go to Sicilia and see Leontes. Now, I personally don't think this is a bright move because as far as I know, Leontes is still crazy and will kill him. But they do this anyway. They go back. So they run off back up to Sicilia. And they get there. And as they're getting there, the king's advisors, Leontes' advisors, are saying, you don't have an heir. You have to get married and have children because you don't have an heir. And Paulina's like, don't you get married. Don't you? I know what you're up to. Don't you get married. You are responsible for these deaths. Don't you get married. And so he doesn't get married because I think he's just scared of Paulina. I'd be scared of Paulina too. Paulina is like the best part of this whole play. And then these two people come in and he somehow knows it's Perdita. And he's like, oh, my long lost daughter. Yes, of course, marry the son of the man that I accused of cheating with my wife and all this. And that's great. And then Polixenes comes and then everything's happy because they're going to get married and the two kingdoms will be united. And this is where Paulina says, why don't you come to my country house where I have made a very lifelike statue of your wife, Hermione. So everyone goes to her country house and she unveils the statue, which is very lifelike. And they talk, oh, her skin is so soft and moist. It almost looks like she's breathing. And then magic, she comes to life and it's Hermione. Now, obviously, anyone would know that it's not magic. It's Hermione and Paulina had a 16-year girls' weekend, and now they're here to just kind of make their big entrance, right? But at this point, everyone lives happily ever after, except for Antigonus, who was eaten by a bear, and Maximilius, who just died and we forgot about him. That's a winner's tale. It's bonkers. So, for me to encapsulate my thoughts on this play, I have stolen something from the All About Agatha podcast. That is a podcast where they read through all of Agatha Christie's novels and then they ranked them on certain criteria. And they came up with a number, and this is how they ranked all of Agatha Christie's novels. I'm going to use that same idea for these Shakespeare plays. So as this is the first one, we'll just kind of walk through it. The first rating is my rating. Like, what did I put this in when I entered it into Storygraph and Goodreads? I gave this a B. You know, I was entertained by it, but it was kind of entertained by it like the way you'd be entertained watching really bad reality television. Like, really? I also had this really weird feeling, and we talked a little about it in this Discord, because Angelia said, Leontes is a little unstable. And I said, yes, he reminds me of King Lear, which is a play that I have read, in school. I'll be reading it again at some point in the next few years. And there's other elements of this play that have shown up in earlier plays. So this play almost felt like Shakespeare was writing a greatest hits album. And he was just pulling these elements that he knew worked well with audiences. So this is Shakespeare's version of fan service. That's my theory behind this. Now, there is another theory that's interesting to think about. I personally don't think it holds water that well. And I've only ever seen one academic propose this theory. But the theory is that this is sort of an attempt to rewrite history a little bit regarding Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And the theory is you always, your main audience member is always your monarch. So it's Queen Elizabeth. And this is her mother and her father, so let's make it so it doesn't look like her father. Sorry, I just got a phone call. That just went away. Let's make it look like her father did not behead her and they actually loved her and, oh, she's the rightful queen. So that's an interesting thought. It doesn't really hold water for me for a lot of reasons. One is that this play came out in 1611, and I believe at that point, Elizabeth had died. So he was not writing it for Queen Elizabeth. If that's the case, if my dates are right, I should have checked that. So there's that. Also, I just can't. Yeah. I don't think that if you have a relationship where a spouse cuts off another spouse's head, I don't see how you can make that look good. I just don't. So I don't know how far. Yeah, it's an interesting to think about. I don't think it's a real thing. There is a documentation that this was actually based on a pastoral story that was written maybe 20 years earlier, but I do think I think it's fan service on Shakespeare's part. So, just for like that, I gave it a B. It's the first play I'm doing in this journey, so a B. So that's 3 points. The next one is reputation. So this is like, I could actually give this point or the score before I read the book. How much do I know about it? All this. So there's going to be plays that are going to get 5 points. Hamlet will get 5 points. Macbeth will get 5 points. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Romeo and Juliet. Those will all get 5 points on here. This one got 1. All I knew about this play going into it was the title, there is one play, I think it's his last play, and I think he even co-wrote it, that I had never heard of. Other than that, all I knew about this play was the title. I didn't even know if it was a comedy or a tragedy or apparently both. So I gave this 1. The next category is ease. How easy was this to read? Now, I gave this one 4. I found this actually very easy to read. I did not have to go to the annotations very often. I was able to just kind of read it and understood what was going on. I didn't get lost in some of the jokes, because comedy, especially in Shakespeare, is what doesn't age well, only because what they found funny are not things that we would normally find funny. Like, it's just a different sense of humor. So I thought this was pretty easy to read. Now, I'm reserving the right, because I will be at certain points revisiting all these rankings. I don't know if that's because this actually is an easier play to read or because I'm just better at reading Shakespeare than I thought. But at this point, I'm going to give it a 4. So we're at 8 points so far. So the next one is the characters. Are the characters interesting? Are they complex? Are they realistic sort of characters? I gave this one a 2. For the most part, I think the characters are pretty flat in this. However, I really like Paulina. Paulina is great. So if it weren't for Paulina, it'd probably only get a 1, but I gave it a 2 because of Paulina. So that brings us up to 10 points. Is that right? Yeah. So the next one is poetry. And I gave this one 2. I don't think that this is an especially poetic play. There's nothing, the prose didn't sing to me like it does in some other plays, but, it wasn't horrible. It wasn't like, what? But it didn't sing like a lot of the plays do. So I gave this one a 2. And then finally is the importance. And this is sort of like the other, it's like, I said you could do reputation at the beginning. This is kind of like reputation, but at the end. Like, how important do I think this is that people read this book? And I don't. I gave it a 2 because it's kind of fan service, and it's interesting to kind of see the greatest hits in it. So, so that's 2. So that brings me up to 14 points. Now I have a category and I borrowed this title because I couldn't think of anything else, called Of Its Time. And this encompasses a lot of things. Like, is this a comedy where the comedy just falls flat because it's not funny anymore? Is it a show that has problematic elements? Is it, these sorts of things? Like, did it age well? And I gave this one, and this one, in this case, the higher is the worst. So 5 is bad in this case. 5 is bad, 1 is good, as opposed to the other ones where 5 is good, 1 is bad. I gave this a 1-1. I just think I don't think there's anything problematic in this unless you are pro-bear. I just what? Leontius is crazy, but what? And, faking your death for 16 years? Yeah, but nothing's really problematic. They just might not be good choices. And so I did give this one a 1. So I went from 14, and that 1 point comes off 13. And so this book gets 13 points for me. And that means that it is my number 1 play so far. Of course, it is also the first play. So next month, when I read The Merry Wives of Windsor, I will go through this again, and then we can see how it compares to A Winter's Tale. Now, finally, I'd like to close by reading a passage from it. And I am not a Shakespearean actor, so please bear with me. And this is a scene where this is Paulina, because of course I'm going to read Paulina. And she's basically letting, she's just really upset about what's going on. So, and she's going to Leontes, to the king, basically saying, you're a horrible person. Look at all the trouble you made. It's all on you. What studied torments, tyrant, hast for me? What wheels, racks, fires? What flaying, boiling in leads or oils? What old or newer torture must I receive, whose every word deserves to taste of thy most worst? Thy tyranny, together working with thy jealousies, fancies too weak for boys, too green and idle for girls of 9. Oh, think what they have done, and then run mad indeed, stark mad, for all thy bygone fooleries were but spices of it. That thou betrayest Polixenes, 'twas nothing. That did but show thee of a fool, inconstant and damnable and grateful. Nor was to much thou wouldst have poisoned good Camillo's honor, to have him kill a king. Poor trespasses, more monstrous standing by, whereof I reckon the casting forth to crows thy baby daughter, to be your nun or little, though a devil, would have shed water out of fire ere done it. Nor is it directly laid to thee the death of the young prince, whose honorable thoughts high for one so tender cleft the heart that can conceive a gross and foolish sire, blemished his gracious dam. This is not no laid to thy answer, but the last, O lords, when I have said, cry woe, the queen, the sweetest, dearest creature dead, and vengeance for it, not dropped down yet. Don't mess with her. Don't mess with Paulina. So there you go. Before next week, I will have watched a production of The Winter's Tale, and I'll talk about it and sort of my thoughts about it. Again, Winter's Tale is not a widely performed show, so it's just going to be probably something from the RSC, I guess. I'd have to look and see exactly what this production is, but there are plays that have innovative and high budget productions. This is not one of them, but I will be talking about that. The week after it, if I get all my reading done, I am going to be talking about The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson. I found 2 retellings of this, The Gap of Time, and the other one was called Exit Pursued by a Bear. I decided to go for Gap of Time because Exit Pursued by a Bear, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the author. That's YA, and YA isn't really speaking to me, but I have another book I need to read before Gap of Time. So I'm hoping in 2 weeks, I should be able to do Gap of Time. I'm going to talk about Gap of Time. So, and then we're into February, and I don't know for the first week of February what I'm going to do yet, because at that point I will still be reading The Merry Wives of Windsor. It won't be time to do the next draw. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. Anyway, thank you very much. I will see you the next time. Please like, subscribe, and if you are interested in joining me on this journey, in my Discord, the information down below, there is a thread called The Bard Room. We are discussing these plays as we go along, and I would love to have you join me, even if it's just randomly for plays and dropping in and out. That's great. I would love to have people to talk about this with. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Bye.